The Paul Leslie Hour, helping people tell their stories. And now, your host, Paul Leslie.
Hey, it's me. Welcome to a brand new episode of your Paul Leslie Hour. Are you there? Don't leave, because I have a great guest, our very own Dave Martin. Not only are we going to meet Dave, but he's going to be playing some songs for you. Before we get into the interview, I wanted to remind you there's an easy way you can keep the show going. Go on thepaulleslie.com and click Support the Show. It takes 10 seconds and makes a world of difference. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to focus in on one particular artist on this episode of the Paul Leslie Hour. Dave Martin is a part of the great American tradition of singer-songwriters. He's released his album entitled Imagination in Focus. Dave Martin is somewhat reminiscent of Todd Snider, with a touch of Arlo, Guthrie, and Jimmy Buffett, maybe a smattering of Steve Goodman and Randy Newman. You could say he writes and performs story songs. It's a great pleasure to welcome this Illinois-based singer-songwriter recording artist, Dave Martin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, hi, Paul. Thank you very much for having me on. It's nice to be here with you today.
It's an honor. When anybody listens to your songs, you're going to find quite a number of topics. Even just from looking at the titles, they're really compelling. They're interesting and not typical from what you maybe would see with other writers. Where do you get these ideas for your songs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I adhere to the idea of, if you move throughout the world with the antenna up a little bit and try keeping, I try to keep my mouth shut and ears open. And, that sounds a little cliched, but I think it does lead to stories. I think that to be a good writer in any capacity, you first have to be a good reader. I like to read books. I don't feel like I'm very discerning in what I read. If it's interesting, I'll read it. So I've read great fiction. I've read there's a Key West, the Alex Rutledge, the Key West murder mystery kind of series. I'm into that. I like a lot of historical books, so there's that. And then sometimes if there's something that's happening in the world topically, I'll get into that arena and write about those types of things occasionally. And it's just that becomes a conscious decision of, okay, this is crazy. This craziness is happening out there, and I got to write a song about it. I need to use the mechanism of humor to kind of offer or maybe grant myself some perspective about a certain thing that might be happening in the world. But so occasionally I'll do topical stuff, but usually, it's just, it's reading, keeping an open mind, and wherever that leads me, that's where the song goes.
Listening to your music, I was sure that you were somebody who liked reading books. And you mentioned the Alex Rutledge mystery novels. But tell us about some of the other favorite books of yours.
Sure. Probably the funniest book that I have ever read, I think, would have to be A Confederacy of Dunces, about Ignatius Riley, this delusional guy down in New Orleans. Who was that? That was John Kennedy Toole, I think, wrote that book. I really liked Vonnegut, and so Slaughterhouse-Five has been a kind of a mainstay in my stable of books. So those are a couple of examples, and I'm kind of looking at the bookcase behind me right now to see, if I had to put like a third one in there in the top three. Oh, I don't know. That's a variable. I read the start of quarantine here in the springtime. I read a couple of epic tomes. I read Lonesome Dove, Larry McMurtry. I loved that book. And just a rich story. Loved that book. And I also read David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, and that was a great story with some keen insight to a specific subset of the population, namely addicted people. That was a fascinating look. So,
Well, the title track of the album is Imagination in Focus, which is really, really an intriguing title, but tell us about that song.
sure. Yeah. So that's that title, Imagination and Focus, I think is kind of a mission statement for what follows, what is on the album. They are. I really believe that when things look too ugly out there, we can always retreat into our imagination. And kids, it's so alive in kids. And then, unfortunately, as you age, it's one of those things that in some cases, if we're not guarding it, the imagination can get dulled, I think. But it's so important. It's such an important antidote to what can happen out there in the world. So sometimes. But the title track starts off with this love triangle gone weird. Back at the turn of the last century, so about 120 years ago in 1900, there was this beautiful chorus girl, Evelyn Nesbit, who would dance. So chorus girls would dance and sing on Broadway shows. And she was seduced by a Lothario architect, Stanford White. The guy was a creep. I mean, she was just a kid, really. But he seduced her. And then later, she got married to the son of a wealthy coal baron from Pennsylvania. And this guy's name was Harry K. Thaw, and he was just flat out nuts. I mean, he was crazy. And so he became enraged with jealousy directed at Stanford White, the Lothario architect who seduced his wife before they were married. And so he killed Stanford White. And that's where we jump off with this album. A couple other things that I would say about the song. So we have that as sort of the basis. And I kind of start there because I think there's a rich history in the American cultural fabric of kind of these bad news stories, intrigue, seduction, scandal, and murder. It's all there. And I'm compelled by that stuff too. So I thought it would make sort of a good kind of a pop and a statement to start the album right there. So that's kind of in the first verse. Then the chorus of the song is really sort of an introduction because it goes, hello there and how do you do? Me, I'm fine living life from my wicked right point of view and so on. But that's more, that's me introducing myself then. And then we go into the bridge, which, I take from Mark Twain, has a great quote. You can't depend on your eyes when your imagination's out of focus. So that appears in the bridge. I love that. That's one of my favorite quotes. He's another one. You asked about writers and books, but Mark Twain's way up there in my mind. So, and then in the final verses of the song, what we get into is I'm down in Chicago where I spent a lot of formative time and romping around the city. And I found myself at this barbecue, this backyard barbecue, with a bunch of yuppies, and that's fine. I get along with most people. But then somewhere in there, I decided, I don't want these people to be here at this barbecue with me. So there was a guitar handy, and I thought, if I start playing Jerry Jeff Walker songs, I bet you they won't get it. And I'll drive these Philistines, I call them, out of this barbecue. And it worked. And so that shows up in the song. So Jerry Jeff Walker, of course, wrote the now standard Mr. Bojangles, just died, in the last month or so. And he was a big, big influence on me. I love the spirit of that guy, just truly, on the road and being free. So anyway, but I digress. So that's the third verse, and then the final verse is, it kind of culminates. So we start in New York City with that love triangle murder story that I was talking about. Then in the end, it's me coming to New York. About 8 years ago, I went out to New York City with my brother in the summertime, and I really loved it. It really is the nerve center of the nation, and you get that awesome kind of feeling, and powerful place, and truly global city. We don't have too many of those, I don't think, in this country where, well, I know certainly there's not a lot of places you can walk a city block, for example, and hear 6 different languages being spoken, which happened in New York. So yeah, I kind of examine that my arrival to New York in the last verse. And that's kind of the way the song goes. So I'd like to play it for you. Is there anything else we need to know about it? Or that was maybe a pretty exhaustive setup there.
Well, you've piqued my curiosity. I would like to hear it. I think a lot of the listeners would like to hear it as well.
Okay, great. I will grab my little mahogany guitar here and kind of back up in the chair. So excuse me if there's any chair rolling on the floor sounds. But here it is, imagination and focus. Here we go. Like the scandals in country clubs, now we're talking the kind of bad news that wins my passion. Stanford White and the girl in the red velvet swing. What can I say? I like my trouble old-fashioned. Now think about all these dipshits all around me. I'm versed with Evelyn Nesbit and Harry K. Thaw. The Loterio, the chorus girl, and the morphine fiend who broke all the big loves. Hello there, and how do you do? Me, I'm fine, living life from my wicked right point of view. It keeps me different, got plenty of room for characters in the land of the free. Happy to have you along, won't you keeping on with me? I'ma take my Camiroso, carry on to another locus. I think we could have seen some wonderful things, but honey, you can't depend on your eyes when your imagination is out of focus. The wooden folk singer sings at the folk school, backyards full of yuppies swilling smug brews. And it might take some of Jerry Jeff's rhymes to drive these Philistines out of this barbecue. So I made it to the Mighty Nerve Center. New York, New York, I dig your vibe. I'm hustling up the coast of the tenement, where this whole damn thing started coming alive. And singing, hello there, and how do you do? Me, I'm fine, living life from my wicked right point of view. It keeps me different, got plenty of room for characters in the land of the free. Happy to have you along, won't you keeping on with me? In the land of the free, you gotta keeping on with me. Keeping on with me. Come on, keep on with me. Oh, thank you, Paul. And if you're listening, you can see, if you can listen and see at home where the mistake in the chord change was in that song, because there is a mistake there toward the end. So,
Well, I mean this in the most complimentary way. It's very, very Steve Goodman-ish, which I love. Steve Goodman.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. That's really cool to hear. I've gotten that comparison a couple of times from different people, and it's always a high compliment. And Steve, I would say that for me, the constellation of artists like that, it started with Jimmy Buffett, and I got turned on to Steve Goodman's music from Jimmy Buffett, and also by virtue of living in Chicago. I went to grad school down at DePaul in Lincoln Park and played and took classes at the Old Town School of Folk Music. And so Stevie Goodman, when I got into that stuff, the song that he wrote with John Prine, "You Never Even Called Me by My Name," the perfect country song. I was like, man, that stuff, that just took the roof off the house for me. I love that. So it's fun to hear you say that, and I appreciate that.
My pleasure. Well, Chicago, as you mentioned, being the place where Steve Goodman is just synonymous. I mean, still just such a legendary name. But there have been a lot of great singer-songwriters either from there or who passed through there. Chicago played a very big part in their story. Would you say Chicago has had a big influence on you, Dave?
Well, I think that my dad grew up in Chicago, and so I am the product of a family that my dad was a city kid, grew up in one of the kind of classic working neighborhoods in Chicago in Edison Park, and my mom grew up on a farm in Iowa, and so I think geography and the associated culture with different geographical points are big inputs for a lot of people, and I know they were for me. And so, Chicago, I spent a lot of time there just visiting. My grandparents would live down there, so we'd go down there when I was a kid. And then, like I said, I went to school, and certainly I did grad school down in Chicago and played my first gigs down there and stuff. And then certainly on the other hand, like where my mom grew up, on the farm in Iowa, that was a huge formative influence on me as well. I spent a lot of time getting an education that was all kinds of politically incorrect from my grandfather, who was a farmer, and his buddies at the coffee shop and stuff. And the farm had a big influence on me as well. So.
And where in Illinois are you now?
So now I'm in our cozy little hamlet of Crystal Lake, which is I'm local. I'm close. I'm right near where I grew up. This is just Crystal Lake's a northwest suburb of Chicago. So that's where I'm at. Just about 45 minutes outside of kind of downtown Chicago. So.
How would you say that you learned to write songs? Was that something that was largely self-taught?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I would say this. So my parents were, a couple of war babies, baby boomers. So they were big music fans. And so growing up, there were always records on, the old LP records in the house. And, pretty eclectic taste, I think. I mean, you'd always have the Beatles, you'd have some like Steely Dan, Stevie Wonder, all that kind of stuff, But singer-songwriters were heavily represented too. So I got turned on to James Taylor when I was 3 years old. And something about his tastefully kind of finger-picked acoustic guitar just resonated with me. And I loved the stuff from the time I was like 3 or 4 years old. So, and he happens to be good family entertainment. So my folks loaded up the station wagon when I was 5. And with my brother and sister, mom and dad, we went to a James Taylor concert at Poplar Creek, which is a now defunct outdoor amphitheater. And we had our seats up on the lawn. I was a fan, like I've said, at this point already at the age of 5. I brought my plastic guitar that had rubber bands for strings on it to the show. And I bandied about the lawn out there at Poplar Creek, regaling people with, with this plastic rubber band strung guitar, just kind of plucking around, screwing around like a kid. And then we're watching the show, and I'm so awestruck by it and everything that by about halftime, about the intermission, I was like, well, I want to go meet him. And I'd already decided long ago this guy was my hero. And so, but we noticed that there was a flower vendor selling individual roses. And the people were buying these and taking them down to the foot of the stage. And so probably to appease me more than anything and figuring this could at least get the boy close to his hero, JT. My dad took my sister and myself, and we bought a rose. And my mom and brother stayed to defend the turf out there on the lawn. And so I'm carrying this rose, and we walk it down toward the stage, like we're going to go set it on the stage, our gesture of appreciation to James Taylor. Well, I'm walking this thing, and when I get down to the foot of the stage, he finishes a song and he puts his guitar down and he comes over to me and picks me up into his arms. And I'm not making this up. This really happened. And so, yeah. And so now I'm on stage at the age of 5 with James Taylor. And, people ask me, do you remember that? You bet I do. Because as I said, he was already my hero. And it was such a pivotal moment. I mean, I remember he was, to my 5-year-old self, he was very sweaty and more wrinkled than I expected. And this didn't seem too rock and roll to me, but back toward like the wings of the stage as I looked to my right facing the stage, I saw a sink. There was a porcelain sink back there that was visible. And I thought, that's not rock and roll, man. But, but it was there. And he said hi. And he asked me my name, and I told him, and he said, he asked me how old I was, and I told him I was 5, and he asked, are you having a good time? And I said, yes, I am. And I remember all that clear as a bell. And so anyway, that was our exchange. Then he put me down. My sister and dad are waiting there, right there for me. So then we start walking, and we have to walk all the way up the pavilion to get back to our lawn seats. So it's a long walk. And the spotlight is trained on me for part of that walk, no joke. And I'm getting high fives on either side of the aisle the whole way back up to the lawn seats, And I'm like, who the hell wouldn't want a career in show business, man? This is it for me, no brainer. So that was, and I did. And, after that, I begged my parents, and they were always good about, hey, you guys going to work on something? You want a project? All right, sure. Learn something. That's great. So they upgraded to a real guitar, and we went into the music store so I could take lessons. And they said, well, bring him back, in a couple years, let his fingers grow a little bit and bring him back when he's a couple years older. And we did. And so really, I think I started playing the guitar seriously when I was by the age of 10, and, shortly thereafter, maybe even immediately, I started to try to write songs. It's just an extension of, for me, if I was going to learn how to play an instrument, and I had already gotten my first taste of the biz, there was no doubt about it. I was going to write songs. It took a long time before it was anything I'd care to share probably with anyone, but that's how you learn. You just start to do it. And so I think James Taylor was the principal inspiration. And then I would say that, I mentioned earlier, and you mentioned Buffett. Well, Jimmy was, my folks had the greatest hit CD in the car. And I remember listening to that stuff and thinking, man, these are gems. These are just clever, well-written, and funny songs, and they're like 3.5 minutes long. And I thought, I can do this. And of course, I was 10. I couldn't do that, and it takes a ton of work. But that there was something about his sensibility that really resonated with me of looking at the humorous side of life, and that kind of thing. So I would say, to follow up on that, as a reward for practicing the guitar and being a good little student, a year or two into taking lessons, my mom bought me Jimmy Buffett's double disc, the live album, You Had to Be There from 1978, I think it was. And I put that thing on, and I started, because Grapefruit, Juicy Fruit was the first song on the second side, or the second disc. By the time I came around, it was a CD, and that was the first song, and I put that on first because I knew that song. I liked that guitar part, and I think they had the time, like how long each track was, and I saw it was like 11 minutes or 9 minutes or something. I thought, Grapefruit, Juicy Fruit, lucky if it's 3 minutes long. What is he doing for this other? But what it was is Jimmy telling this wonderful, irreverent, crazy, shaggy dog tale about running around South Florida, screwing around and everything. And he just had the people eating out of the palm of his hand with that. And that lit my head on fire too. That was another really, but to hear that, you could not only sing songs that were funny and clever but tell the story of the genesis of the song. I mean, when I started performing when I was in my early 20s, I'd go up and talk as much as I'd sing, and part of that was to get over the nerves of having to, okay, now I got to go sing. Well, if I can get these people laughing and talk to them a little bit, maybe that'll work for me. So it was instructive to hear that Jimmy Buffett record.
Really interesting stuff, and I have to say, I've heard so many accounts of of interesting show business stories, and that James Taylor tale, that's one of the best stories I've ever heard.
Yeah, thanks, man. I mean, I think so too, and I'm just because it's just happenstance that I wonder. I'd like to talk to James someday. And I'd like to meet him again now and ask if he remembers. Was there a time in the late '80s when you were picking up kids onto the stage, or was I the only one? I'd just be curious to hear if he has any recollection at all of anything like that. So,
well, James Taylor, get back to us, please.
Yep, come on, JT. Love to talk.
I know he listened to one of the shows that we did a while ago, because he commented on it and shared it on his Facebook page. So maybe he'll hear this.
I hope so. I really do. Yeah, I think it'd be great to chat with James. Just a great guy. I love his story, man.
What would you say is your favorite James Taylor song?
Oh, that's a good question. You got songs like Carolina in My Mind, sort of standard bearers, or something like, I know he has said that like Sweet Baby James has got a really complex kind of rhyme scheme that he's happy with, and it is like the quintessential cowboy lullaby song. And, so those are good. I like, from Sweet Baby James, 1970, I like, what is that? Sweet for 20G, which I think, this is the story on that, is that the record was done or almost done, I think, you know what it was? He got a $20,000 advance from the record company, and he needed one more song. And so he mashed up, these 3 songs that he was working on, 3 totally disparate songs. There's one that's like, it's got like a blues thing going on in there, and then another one's like more of a folk song. But anyway, he put the 3 of them together. It's like a 6-minute track, and he called it Sweet for 20G, because after he wrote that song, and he got the advance, boom, he got his suite or whatever. I don't know, his suite of songs was the story there, but he got his 20G and off he went. So that's a cool song, good energy. And then I like some of his. I like all of James, really, but from the later albums or that middle distance, maybe Copper Line's a very sort of evocative song to me. Do you have a favorite, Paul?
Oh,
of his?
Copper Line is up there. That's definitely one of them. A killer song.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what comes to mind just immediately would be Close Your Eyes.
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Gorgeous stuff.
What about perhaps a favorite Buffett song of yours?
Yeah. Gosh, and that's a tough one too. I think sometimes if I'm going to play for people and say, okay, well, yeah, Cheeseburger in Paradise and Margaritaville and stuff, but let's get into the deeper cuts. I think the song that exudes the Jimmy Buffett essence just perfectly is like Barefoot Children in the Rain from Barometer Soup. Are you familiar with that cut?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. It's such a sunny and genuine and just a good natured, it just captures his essence. I love that tune. And then if you go back, into the 70s and stuff, something like Death of an Unpopular Poet. I mean, hey man, if it's good enough for Bob Dylan, it's good enough for me, I mean, you can't go wrong with something like that. There's so many gems. There are so many gems of, I was just watching a thing with Buffett over the Thanksgiving holiday he was playing with Paul Brady in Dublin. in 2019, and they played. Now this is a traditional song, but Lakes of Pontchartrain. Now that's the song that I've been trying to memorize. There's like 6 verses. This is like an old traditional song from New Orleans, from Jimmy's kind of stomping grounds and stuff, or one of them. And it was really cool to hear that. So it's cool to keep discovering, songs by and because of these favorite artists of mine. Well, I don't know. How would you answer that question? The Buffett. I realize I didn't really answer it, but it's a thinker. I'd have to think on that. But do you have one you go to?
There's one that I really, really, really love that, as far as I know, he's only played twice, and that would be Nobody Speaks to the Captain No More.
You bet. Yeah. From 1980, 86, I think that one came out. Yep. That's great storytelling. I wrote a song called, it's not on this record. What's it called? Captain Out with a Bang, which, I mean, I think that the impetus of writing a song about a captain was seated in Jimmy Buffett's Nobody Speaks to the Captain No More. So.
How about that? Now, is that a song you can, not to put you on the spot, readily play?
Yeah, let's give it a shot.
I'd like to hear that.
Sure. I think the story kind of speaks for itself, so I probably don't really even need to introduce it too much, but I'll give it a whirl, and I think I should be able to do it here and get through it. I like this song. So we'll put it on the next record, but anyway, Captain Out with a Bang here. The wharf smelled candy, floss, and tobacco. Seeking games there, he was hungry, young, and wacko. One summer night he liberated crooked councilman's car, and he took a leggy blonde out to a dive raw bar. But that baby kisser showed up with his gang. Captain Out with a Bang. Now the councilman failed to pay his income tax, so Cap's got the car that blonde's in front and their baby's in the back. They found a cottage by the ocean, bought some fishing boats. They said he ran 'em hard, but he kept the fleet afloat. Then one day on the Atlantic, looking for bluefish, he found a storm off Tuckernuck Island, a fisherman's death wish. That Boston whaler started rolling, and she flipped on the third wave, upside down on a sandbar, with just his life to save. Well, he tied on to the anchor and pulled his knife. On the hull he etched a goodbye to his son and his wife. When a maritime Defiant appeared, piloted by his old man, he said, "You better jump in, son. Supper's getting cold on the mainland." Plucked from the sea, spared from a sad refrain. Captain Out with a Bang. He went on to go fishing with crooks and Joes and presidents. He lived comfortably as a member of the Maritime's eyeball residents. He never had any use for wasting time. So he knew what to do when he started losing his mind. Fueled up on pills and whiskey, he headed out on the boat. They found it at Eel Point and read his simple note. Boys, the fat ladies sang, Captain out with the bang. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much.
You bet.
So it seems like a recurring theme in your songs, and especially if you look at this Imagination in Focus album, which I want to tell everybody out there, if they want to hear it, they can go to davemartin.hearnow.com, and from there, you can listen right from there, but also it takes you to all the usual places, Apple Music, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Pandora, Deezer, all that. There's a character song, and some people out there might be familiar. He was a famous pitcher, Cal McLeish.
Yes.
What inspired you to write about him?
So that song came about as a result of my dad. And my dad was a baseball player, and his dad was a baseball enthusiast. So my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, and he was my grandfather that I'm referring to. He was a storyteller and a musician in his own right. He played the piano and stuff, and he was a salesman, a car salesman, and very much the part, kind of a very charming guy. But anyway, he used to, when my dad was growing up and playing ball in the backyard, I guess my grandfather used to kind of rattle off this name. Calvin Coolidge, Julius Caesar, Tuskahoma McGlish, Mikey. Mike is my dad. He called him Mikey. And I don't know, just kind of wrap around that a little bit. It turns out it was the given name. When my dad was a little kid, he thought, oh, this guy's just crazy, he's screwing around or whatever. But it was actually, he was a real ball player, and his real given name was Calvin Coolidge, Julius Caesar, Tuskahoma McGlish. And the story goes that Cal, the guy, said that, that he was the seventh child born in his family, and that his mother named all the previous children, and she allowed her husband, his father, to name him. So the father had to make up for lost time and gave him all these names, to catch up, kind of, because he hadn't named any of the previous kids they'd had. So, but that was his name, and it's an oddball story because, he was kind of a journeyman pitcher in the major leagues, but he did pitch in one All-Star game. He was a 20-game winner one year, and he was ambidextrous. He could throw left and right-handed. And so, that just kind of adds to the oddball, quirky quality of the story. But then when I found out that he left the game for a period of time and went over to fight in World War II, like a number of those guys did back then. And I just thought, all the elements, this stuff is like, this is perfect. This guy needs a folk song. If anyone ever needed a folk song, it was Cal McGlish, this journeyman pitcher who was ambidextrous, who went and fought in World War II and had like 6 names or whatever. Like, this guy needed a folk song, so I wrote one for him. And that's kind of the story behind it. Now I'll play it for you here. So here we go.
All right.
Well, yeah, please enjoy Cal McGlish here. John was a brawny man, Lula was a cute little dish. Their 7th born child was named Calvin Coolidge, Julius Caesar, Tuskahoma McGlish. He was born in Caddo County in a dugout with a dirt floor. His dad gave him 2 names and then he gave him 3 more. See, Lula alone had done the naming of all their daughters and sons. John figured he had to play catch up when given permission to name the seventh one. So with the nod to history and home, he spoke his wish. Baby boy shall be Calvin Coolidge, Julius Caesar, Tuskahoma, English. Cal was a strong boy, kind eyes and a shock of black hair. He loved going to the park to watch the baseball sail through the air. And a couple of years on down the line, he took to swinging the lumber. He brought a lot of passion to the plate, but he never could put up the numbers. But left or right-handed, he could get the ball over the dish. The secret weapon, the ambidextrous Calvin Coolidge, Julius Caesar, Tuskahoma, English. And our boy made the show. He was in the bigs at the age of 18. He went and fought the war, came home and played for a few different teams. And he notched 20 wins one year, even pitched in the All-Star game. Still, when you boil it all down, the most notable thing is his name. And it rolls right off the tongue. Sing along if you wish. It's the one and only, there's only one. Calvin Coolidge, Julius Caesar, Tuskahoma, English. That's Calvin Coolidge, Julius Caesar, Tuskahoma, English. Yeah, Calvin Coolidge, Julius Caesar, Tuskahoma, English. And with all the vowels and consonants, and people and things to choose from, isn't it just like us? During his playing days, his nickname was Bus. And that's a true story.
Very clever. Very clever.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Dave.
You bet. Thank you.
What would you say has been the best compliment you've received as an artist?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it'll be interesting now when we can have live music again someday after all this, because there really is a singular thing that takes place, I think, when you're there with a group of people, whether you be performing or in the audience. It's like it's a participatory thing from all stakeholders, I think, to put it very clinically. But it is. It's a shared experience, and it can be powerful and moving, I think, in a lot of ways. So I'm always delighted when people come up after I play and they said, I was really laughing at this, or this really resonated with me. In fact, I just played the Cal McGlish song about the coolest thing that's ever happened to me on Facebook. Is that, and this is like 3 years ago, I'm sitting there on the couch. And I just log in or whatever to Facebook. Got a message. It was from Cal McGlish's daughter. And this is a true story. And she reached out. Her brother was like looking for footage of their dad playing ball on YouTube. And he came across some version of the song, something that ended up on there, because that was before I ever put it up on YouTube. But it was up there, I guess, or something. And they found it and listened to it. And she was like, what a perfect song for my dad. I loved it. And so that was so unbelievably cool to hear that, But so it's things like that. And, I mean, some of the stuff that you said at the beginning of our talk, it's things like those that really, keep me driving at it and fuel me and validate things, for me, like people draw the Steve Goodman comparison. People have said, Buffett, white sport coat and pink crustacean. So a guy, I walked off stage one night and he said, this to me is like a companion piece to that. And I mean, what for me, it just doesn't. That's about it. It's like, okay, I'm good for another year and a half. I can play for the next year and a half and have no one show up because I got that in my back pocket, so.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Dave, would you say that there is a greater purpose to the music that you make
than
simple enjoyment? Is there something that is what it's all about for you?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think that on its face, these are folk songs, and so they're not very chordy and they're not very inaccessible. And if you like to have fun and like a good turn of phrase, I think you like the music. And and sometimes though, Paul, to your question, when I'm writing them, it doesn't always feel. I think that when you put it across, you try to put it across seamlessly and effortlessly, sort of. But it does take work to write them, and also to answer your question further, and maybe in a different dimension or something, or another element to this answer. I think it's a cool thing to do, to be able to bring people together with a song or a handful of songs that you play, and to be the agent of that shared experience, like I was talking about when you listen to live music and you like it, and everyone sort of puts their stuff down for the time being and just has that shared experience of listening to songs and kind of grooving on it or whatever they do. That's pretty neat. So it's cool to be witness and an agent of that, I think. And making records is it's a statement that you're putting out to the world. And so it's kind of cool to be able to look back and say, okay, at this point in my life, this is what I was thinking about. This is what I was talking about, So I enjoy doing it, and I like it for those reasons.
You put this very well, Dave.
Well, thank you, Paul.
Of course. What would you say is the best thing about being Dave Martin?
The best thing about being Dave Martin, huh? Well, I think it is good and to be sort of known as the funny guy, because sometimes people don't expect that much from you too. So I'll take those sort of modest expectations and meet them and exceed them. To be able to do that is fun. But I think that I have a genuinely pretty fun-loving spirit and a pretty open heart and open mind, and I think that people who know me and like me would would tell you that, and so I think I bring that to the table sometimes, and so that's fun.
Anybody out there, if you want to check out the album Imagination in Focus, you can go to davemartin.hearnow.com. You can also check out davemartinmusic.org. I always like to give the artist the stage on this show. And music is something that it has a tremendous potential for people to hear, to identify, to understand, to come together. For anyone who's tuned in, what would you say to those people who are listening to us right now?
I would say to them that you've made it this far, so thank you, because we're about 50 minutes in now, so thank you for listening, and I welcome you to explore my music, certainly, and up to this point, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening, and come on the journey with me. It's fun.
Throughout this interview, I was thinking about an old tradition that I had when I was first starting in radio, and I don't know, and I don't want to put you on the spot. I would like to kind of bring that back, if possible, and that is what we used to do is for the last song of the show, we would play something that was kind of slow, kind of a little bit more, I don't know what you would say, touching maybe, or maybe a little more pensive. Is there
Okay.
a song in the Dave Martin catalog that would maybe fit for a nice farewell for the listeners?
Sure. You bet. Yeah, I got some ballads, and I like the ballads. I do. So from that record that we just put out, well, why don't I do the Kid on the Farm song?
That's a good one.
Well, thanks. This is a song, kind of a remembrance of my time, as I mentioned earlier. My dad's from Chicago. My mom's an Iowa farm kid. So, that was another big input in my early life, hanging out with farmers and my grandfather. And I just loved their dry wit, their wisdom, their poise, and cool. Just wrangling cantankerous machinery and ornery livestock and whatever. Not too much scared them or excited them. And I like that stoicism. And so, I used to, growing up as I did sort of around Chicago, because I grew up in suburban Chicago, and going out to the farm was such a departure, and it was an adventure to me. It felt like a sense of adventure, felt like a sense of purpose always happening out there with the work that they were doing, bringing in the crop with the harvest in the fall before the bad weather. It's like there was stuff at stake. And so there's always this awesome quality to it all to me. And so, my grandfather, actually, that's another story, but the family farm, my grandfather's farm, 400 acres, it was won, so they say, in a poker game by his uncle. He won. He came out on a lucky hand of poker. He won 400 acre, family farm, what became the family farm. I mean, what a great Americana flavored story that is, So anyway, but yeah, so I'll play this song here, kind of the Kid on the Farm, about hanging out with my grandfather and then having that chapter close, ultimately, as everything does in the final analysis. So here it is. My days were big and new and charmed, and they were simple good times as a kid on the farm. My grandfather taught me the story of how we got here from Spookendike Hill. All it took was his crazy uncle winning at poker and saying 400 acres ought to fit the bill. Approaching from Washburn Road, the big silo was the first thing that you'd see. Soon the farm was in view, they were waving at you. It always felt like coming home to me. From the time I was 4, I was glued to his side. The love of the land will not be denied. And we'd hit the fields with lunch in a pail, bed linens in tow, for I'd sleep a while on the long days, or sit on his lap and he'd let me steer down the rows. Approaching from Washburn Road, the big silo was the first thing that you'd see. Soon the farm was in view, they were waving at you. It always felt like coming home to me. I was a young man setting out to make my rounds. When he and my grandma left the farm and moved into town. My last night there I realized the tender age had come to an end. Well, we buried him this summer, but what a privilege for a boy to have known such a man among men. Approaching from Washburn Road, the big silo was the first thing that you'd see. Soon the farmers in view, they were waving at you. It always felt like coming home to me. Oh, it always felt like coming home to me. Thank you, Paul.
I liked all the songs, but I have to say, and I'm a sucker for a good ballad, that was probably my favorite.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's a sentimental favorite of mine as well, and a lot of my family members who knew that relationship and knew my grandfather, you know. Yeah.
Well, Dave Martin, thank you for taking us on this musical journey. Thank you for letting us get to know you.
You bet. Thank you for being on it with me, and thanks, Paul, for directing the traffic here. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Well, my best to you.
All right. My best to you. Thanks, Paul.
Good night.
Good night.
Bop bop doodly beep bop dee da dee bumpity boo rapati kana sa jip bop kila kana sa gil bond good tingy jiga manga but this yeah hunger I get back in the woo I got the inga rock tinga langa bo I can't oh goodbye.